Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ivy, for coming before me. Can everyone see my screen? Gold fingerprinting technology. Is that on the screen now?
Yes, it certainly is, sir. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So, and feel free if anyone to jump in at any time and pose questions before the Q&A section. As timing would have it, this is right on school returns. My kids, I've just heard, come through the door making a racket. But at the heart of today's talk is how the use of innovation and technology can independently and at scale underpin claims made around the responsible sourcing of raw materials. And I'll tie gold fingerprinting into one of those technologies and give a history of where it's come from and how it can now be adopted outside of the agricultural industry where it is quite strong at the moment. But I really want to start with this slide here, which is a fabulous book if anyone hasn't read it, called Guns, Germs and Steel. And it's a fabulous insight into human history and how those three key fundamental elements, guns, germs and steel, have been fundamental to the economic development and success of some cultures, but also the demise of others. And one of the key takeouts, and interesting takeouts, is that humans actually have a pretty bad history in their adoption of really beneficial technology. And quite often, some of the best technological advancements that we now benefit from today were only adopted many generations after they were first invented. And sadly, actually sometimes well after the original inventor had created it and they died before it was then taken up and adopted in the next generation. So for the innovators on the call, that's pretty some somber news around the time it takes to take great technology and to commercialize that. But what it does is it gives us insight into that the answers to some of our challenges, or more importantly, the answers to deliver on some of these really important social claims, might already exist. We don't need to recreate or design new technology. We just simply need to look around other industries that have basically tried to deliver solve the same challenge, and to see what we can adopt and take from there. And this slide sort of sums up, and I think everyone's seen this slide before, with the creation of the wheel and the fact that it took a while for people to adopt it. So let's start with the origins of gold fingerprinting. So gold fingerprinting is a term that's used that can identify the mine of origin of a gold doré bar or even a gold bar itself. And it was used, it started to being applied in the 1990s and has been applied since then to actually solve criminal and fraud cases involving stolen gold and stolen diamonds, and theft cases or fraud cases involving gold salting. And ultimately, the technology has been able to take a stolen piece of gold and not only trace it back to its original mine, but actually trace it back to the date in which that gold doré bar was poured, which allowed a much closer surveillance or investigation around the people of interest that had access to that gold pouring room at that date. And as a result, it's led to numerous prosecutions and successful cases. So that's where the original application occurred, but it's not actually gold fingerprinting, because the technology can be applied and has been applied to pretty much all food and non-food products. It just simply has been termed gold fingerprinting by some people because its original application was to gold. So in terms of the establishment of the scientific method, there's over 100 peer-reviewed publications across multiple minerals and agricultural commodities that it's been validated to be used against. It's been entered into multi-jurisdictional case law. There's expert evidence, legal references that have been written on it. So now it's a very well-established scientific method, both in the scientific community, but also the legal community. So if there's a determination made on this scientific method that that product has not come from its claimed source, when that goes to court, that determination isn't challenged. What is challenged is what it was the intent to mislead or mislabel. And that's a different question. But the actual determination that that product has come from a sustainable source, if that product hasn't come from that source, that claim isn't questioned in court. So it's been really well established. It's also been applied, I'm sure you can see this slide here, It's also been applied to solve a number of, numerous cases around food fraud, fraud around wine, which is well known, or the issue of wine fraud is well known. We can take a bottle of wine and we can scientifically verify whether the claims of it's come from a French winery is correct, or whether we can determine that it's actually reconcentrated grape juice from China. It's been used in global food fraud cases involving tracing or claimed organic grain all the way through from Eastern Europe into Malta, into the US. And it's actually even been used to solve unfortunate cases of murder where the technology was able to link a piece of broken glass found at the crime scene to a piece of broken glass also found in a suspect's shoe. And that piece of evidence ultimately led to a key part of that conviction and solved that quite famous case in Australia. So it's been well used and well documented as an investigative tool. So the question for this call is, well, why is it important to conflict minerals or to underpin claims of conflict-free and responsible sourcing? And that question gets down to, why is provenance verification important? And if you look at this slide, you'll see maybe some well-known certification claims that you'll see on the packaging of commercial products that hit the market. Sustainable seafood claims by some really good certification groups in the MSC and ASC that was set up from WWF, the fair trade claims, the country of origin labelling, the claims of organic produce, and the claims of sustainable palm oil. What all of those claims have in common is that those claims don't relate to the specification or the quality of the product. They relate to how that product was created. Was it created or mined or produced in an ethical and sustainable way? Were the employees of the companies that produced that product treated well? Were the companies that were mining that product at that location connected to the community, paying the right royalties and making sure that the communities in which they take products from, they're equally giving back? They are values-based claims, but all of those claims relate specifically to the source of origin. So they're actually provenance-based claims, and you can't disconnect where the product has been produced versus what the ultimate values-based claim is. And what these entities do, the MSC, the fair trade, the organics, the sustainable palm oil, they do a fantastic job at going to the source of production and making sure that those companies are doing the right thing and delivering on their social claims. What they can't necessarily do is validate the product that ends up on the supermarket shelf carrying their certification has actually come from that source. And therefore there's a risk that there's products and objects that haven't been made in those locations and actually been made down the road in a different mine or a different farm that doesn't have any of those value-based deliverables, actually entering the supply chain, carrying that certification, ripping off consumers, and just as importantly, actually destroying the very social claims that we need and that we put a premium on. So how do we work in connection with them? The certification groups verify that at the source of production, they are delivering on those social claims. Source Certain or another technology provider similar to us verify that the product that ends up on the shelf has come from those claimed sources. And then together, we deliver the promise of a sustainable product to the consumer and all the various supply chain participants who pay a premium to buy products that have come from a sustainable source. So that's why provenance is important. And that's why provenance verification technology goes hand in hand with certification and sustainable claims. In terms of its industry adoption, while it's not relatively well known on a global level, it's actually well known in Australia. It's been adopted by 3 whole of industries. So the Australian prawns, the Australian barramundi and the Australian pork industries. Each of those industries have a much higher cost of production than some of their overseas competitors, particularly because in order to maintain the sustainability of your product and to maintain really high labour standards, that's obviously more expensive than if you had to do that in a developing economy. So there's always the risk that, and it often happens, that someone takes an overseas prawn, mislabels it as an Australian prawn, and then gets a premium when they sell it through to the consumer. So our services actually, on a routinely basis, we actually take product off a supermarket shelf that's claimed to be an Australian prawn or Australian piece of barramundi, and we actually forensically validate that that's actually correct. And if it's a mislabeled prawn and it's actually a prawn from Vietnam, we work within the supply chain to fix those issues, to ensure that if you are in a position to pay a premium for a product that carries a values-based claim, that you're doing so and you're getting the value that you're actually paying for. And then it protects the producers that have gone to the lengths to make sure that their production is sustainable. So it's been widely adopted in Australia from an agricultural perspective. We're now looking to support a broader adoption of not only this technology, but similar technologies to the OECD 5-step framework around the global standards towards responsible mineral supply chains. Key question is, how does our technology or services fit within that framework? No technology or service provider should be trying to redesign the system. There already is a really good system. There's a really good framework. We are but another service provider that can work within that framework to help businesses and investors ensure that the claims that they believe are true and which are important to both them as a business and them as people can actually be independently verified. So if you look at the 5-step framework, the first step is the establishment of strong management systems. And I can just talk verbatim here straight off the framework. The framework says you need to establish a system of controls and transparency over a supply chain, including chain of custody and traceability. So that's the establishment of a fundamental tool that allows claims to be carried through a supply chain through to a consumer. If it's purely around traceability, in terms of the further development of blockchain, digital IoT technology creates now really cost-effective technology to build really good end-to-end traceability systems. But what really needs to be understood is that traceability doesn't equal authenticity, and traceability alone isn't integrity. Traceability is a system that carries information about a product as it's transformed through a supply chain, but you need to overlay traceability with authenticity. And that's when you get to the second part of the OECD framework, which says identify and assess risks in the supply chain. And what they're specifically talking about there, and once again, I talk verbatim about OECD, they talk about identify and verify traceability and chain of custody information, and in particular, mine of origin. So a traceability system will say that this product has come from this mine, and therefore, because we've got visibility over the mine, that a third-party certifier has gone to the mine to make sure that they are delivering on their sustainable claims and their treatment of their workforce. Our technology can overlay that, and it can actually take products out of the supply chain and independently test it for its claims as to has it come from mine A. And at times when we test supply chains, because there's a premium for the producers who do the right thing, there's once again the incentive for alternate mines that sit down the road to have their product infiltrate the supply chain, carry certifications around sustainability, but don't actually deliver on those promises. So our technology could overlay that traceability system and independently verify that that product has actually come from that mine and therefore delivers on those values-based claims. The final part that we work within an OECD framework is the fourth step, which is around carrying out independent third-party due diligence of a supply chain. The benefits of the adoption of both our technology and digital and IoT and blockchain technology is that technology allows those type of third-party certifications to now be done at scale and at a reduced cost. And the best example of that is right now. So with COVID-19, we can't send our people to the supply chain to pick up products of which that we need to test. But what we can do is to make sure that those products routinely at each point in the supply chain get sent to our lab. We communicate with all the supply chain stakeholders to say, even though people can't physically get to your mine site or your barramundi farm and physically make sure that you're doing the right thing, what we can do is to make sure that no other additional unknown source is entering the supply chain, because we'll be testing your product when it goes to the wholesaler. We'll be testing your product again when it goes to the retailer. So if you've got issues within your supply because of the COVID-19 impact, you're better off informing your customer that you've got a supply issue rather than importing product from down the road and slipping it into your supply chain, because our technology can work at a distance by just simply receiving samples and testing them against their claim sources. So the scalability of this technology to reduce compliance costs while increasing and improving third-party certification is where real value add can be created. And the final thing I'll leave off before we jump to questions. This is actually a real-life example which I have. I've just taken off the names and the commodity to protect the innocent, but this is a bit of an example of what a traceability and a scientific program integrated looks like. The driver for this is consumer-facing brands under a lot of pressure around some of their raw materials are largely sourced from very high-risk areas. Therefore, they want independent verification that they can go to their consumers that they are not procuring raw materials from conflict areas. And so what they've done, they're starting to now contract directly with the miner. And then what they're doing is we're using our systems to give the OEM direct line of sight of that raw commodity as it comes out of the ground, when it then is transformed at a metal converter and then transformed again into a magnet and then sold again into an OEM. And so we can now scientifically verify that the raw commodity that comes out of the ground is in fact the same raw commodity that's ended up in the magnet that now ends up in the wind turbine. And we do that by linking together scientific testing and digital traceability technology, which means when an OEM makes a claim that say, not only do we know where our raw materials are coming from, but we can validate the sustainable claims that are being made, they can do that to a scientific standard. And therefore, what we're seeing is OEMs coming all the way down into the chain now and looking to contract directly with mining companies. So that offers one, a significant risk to mining companies who don't provide transparency or traceability of their products through the supply chain, but it also creates great opportunity for mining companies, irrespective of where they're based, to actually create these integrated supply chain integrity systems that give clear line of sight of their raw commodity as it's transformed through to a supply chain directly through, ultimately to a product into an iPhone or anything else that we consume on a daily basis. So I'll end on just one last talk, which is just about a vision about, are we a bunch of scientific geeks that just talk about trace elements and stable isotopes? Yes, we are, although I'm not a scientist. But what's our broader vision? Our vision isn't to be a simple, the world's best technology service provider. Our vision and our goal is to work in partnership with like-minded companies throughout all parts of the supply chain, and other various companies such as the certification companies I just spoke to, that all work together to deliver on some of the most important social challenges of our time. And we absolutely believe that innovation can support the continued economic development in both a sustainable and responsible way, so that all nations, cultures and people can share in that prosperity. And that's our vision. So at that, I'll accept any questions and look forward to broad discussion.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic, Grant. Thank you very much. And as per usual, you can hear the roaring applause from behind the muted microphones. Now you have lots and lots of questions that are coming in, both through the Q&A, through chat, etc. So in the interests of time, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind just addressing them directly. But one very quick question for myself, and actually it's a question that comes in from Karen, and she asks, this is absolutely fantastic, but who's paying for it? So who's actually paying you guys to do this verification?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Multi-layered, at times it's undertaken by the industry itself. If the whole industry is at risk of a social license issue, it could be an industry adopted thing. In terms of the example that I just gave, that is being funded by the mining company, because the mining company believe that they are higher. It's an Australian-based company. It's a higher cost of production in Australia because of the sustainable standards they have, and therefore their access to market. And in order to compete against other companies, they need this technology that will give them access to the market and allow them to then contract directly with an OEM or a consumer-facing brand. So in this case, it's the mining company. Other times there'll be the OEM will reach in and ask us to do a program so to underpin their claims to make sure that the products that are coming through their supply chain are from their claim sources. So it can be multiple parties.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And yes, so all of you who are asking all those fantastic questions around how you do it, etc. I'm sure that Grant and Nathan, who's also there somewhere in the background. I don't know, Nathan, if you want to come off mute and just give everybody a wave so that we can see who you are.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Nathan, will be able to share their thoughts, etc. Also, just on this note, just to signpost one of our talks tomorrow morning. So Gareth Morgan from Terabotics will be talking about similar aspects of that third-party verification, but using satellite technology, which I guess as well, you guys probably work with similar kind of technologies where you can use overlapping data sets to get that verification. Yes. Awesome. Yes. So brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Grant.